Hi, and welcome to Penn Central 99's channel. I'm Terry, and this is the River Mountain Model Railroad. Hi, and welcome to the workbench. During my layout update for October 2019, I had shown some images of this covered hopper that I'm working on. The main thing with this covered hopper is I decided to experiment with watercolor pencils. And apparently a lot of viewers were very interested in what I had done because I've received several requests for more information on watercolor pencils. So fortunately, I haven't started working on this side of the car yet, so this will give me an opportunity to show you how I use the watercolor pencils. My interest in watercolor pencils was sparked by a video that AK Interactive had uploaded to YouTube. As I was watching the video, I thought, wow, they seem pretty easy and foolproof, and plus, being watercolors, there isn't very much mess or drying time involved in it, so I thought I would experiment with them. But before I went out and bought a slew of AK Interactive watercolor pencils, I checked around the house and fortunately found some watercolor pencils here in our art supplies to experiment with before making the investment. There are numerous brands of watercolor pencils on the market, and there's no way I could cover them all. But fortunately, my wife had several brands in her collection of art supplies that I could practice with. On hand, we had Kimberly watercolor pencils, Prismacolor watercolor pencils, and Hardmouth Tritone watercolor pencils. After experimenting with all three, I really like the Tritone and the Prismacolor. The Kimberly brand just didn't want to seem to mix well with the styrene or plastic surface, so I kind of abandoned those. Now, considering that I was going to get into watercoloring, instead of wasting or ruining my wife's collections of watercolor pencils, I decided to buy my own. So I went to Dick Blick, or Blick Art Supplies, and purchased my own cachet of watercolor pencils. And the reason for that is these are primarily earth tone, plus for a small investment, I really wasn't wasting much money. These are the Derwent brand watercolor These are the Derwent brand watercolor pencils, and at Dick Blick, if you buy 6 or more, they're only $1.60 a piece, so I really didn't think it would be out too much money if they didn't work. But as you can see by looking at the sides of the covered hopper, they seem to be working out very well. So let me give you some close-up shots on how these things work. The brand of watercolor pencils that you choose is going to be a personal preference. I went to Blick Art because I knew the selection would be better, plus I knew you could buy individual colors instead of buying packs with colors that you'll probably never end up using. Plus most of the weathering that we use in model railroading is earth tones. So if you notice, my selection here appears to be a lot of earth tones. And like I said, there's a multitude of colors here. I went with the Derwent brand. You can see here the end of the pencil, they have the color along with the tip. You know, not only the tip that you use is colored, obviously, but the end of the pencil is colored too for easy reference, especially for storage. But like I said, the brand that you choose is going to be personal preference. I elected to go with this brand here, and I'm actually having some pretty good results. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what happens. The style of brush that you use for this technique is going to be a personal preference also. I actually use a couple of different brushes with tip sizes depending on the area that I want to cover with the watercolor pencils. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to use a standard wash brush to show you how to do this. I have selected the burnt umber color here just to show you, and I've also got a piece of scrap styrene here to demonstrate this on. Now there's a couple of things that you can do here, and this is just a standard piece of scrap styrene. You'd see some yellow stains here, but that's from some oil fading techniques that I was experimenting with. So some people, you can just take the tip of the pencil and put it on there. And over here I've got my ashtray just full of standard tap water. Wet the tip. You know, you don't want it too You don't want it too saturated, but since I just put that watercolor on there dry, you can try and smooth that around. And even with it on there dry, you can start to see just a subtle color change there. Now the other thing that you can do, which I actually prefer, is I actually prefer or like to get the tip of the pencil wet. And I think once the watercolor is actually softened by the water, notice how much easier that goes on. Plus, I can kind of take my brush and smooth that around. Give it a couple of seconds to dry. We'll just give it a few seconds of dry time here. If you want to, you can use a hair dryer to speed up the drying process. Okay, that little bit of watercolor has dried. I pulled it up closer to the camera so you can kind of see it a little bit. And you can see the color change just a little bit on that gray background, but I'm going to hold this up closer to you. Like I say, I'm wetting the tip of the pencil in the water. You don't need to soak it very long. And then, like I say, just notice how much easier that goes on. Now, depending on how much weathering you want to do, you can just leave that. Or, like I said, it's kind of like a dry brushing or a color transition. Now I'm just going to use this area here. And you can start to see the color changes there with this watercolor. If I do the whole side, takes out the puddles and possibly the streaks, and we'll let that dry, and you can gradually start to see this is only the second application of the watercolor pencil, and you can already start to see a difference in the color from that gray. This is almost dry already. There you can see the water evaporating off of there. It just doesn't take but a couple of seconds. Like I said if you wanted to, you could use a hair dryer to speed up the process. Now, I'm not blowing on it or anything, I'm just letting it dry itself. You know, look at that, looking pretty good. Let's try this again real quick here. I'm going to dip it in the water and soften it. We're going to put it on there. And I know it takes some patience. When I first started doing this with the watercolor pencils, you know, I was shocked, you know, at that mess right there. But like I say, once you get over the initial shock of all of that color, you know, now be careful doing this, because if you notice, I'm starting to actually move around the first and second layers that we put on there. But if you do this gradually, and you can start to see the color changes there. Pretty nice. I actually like it. It has some applications. Would I do this for every weathering job? Probably not, but it does have some applications. You know, and as it begins to dry, smooth out the rough edges and the puddles. You know, if you want to, take a rag and dry it off. Get rid of the excess. So you want to do this gradually, you know, in subtle changes. See, it's starting to dry there again. So that is taking the tip of the watercolor pencil and putting it right on the surface and working with it to your satisfaction, or the desired weathering or color change or whatever it is you're looking for. Say, would I do it all the time? Probably not, but it's got its applications. You can see the covered hopper right there. That's probably, you know, a couple of minutes of putting that pencil on there and just smoothing it around, working with it. It's going to be dry here in just a few seconds. Okay, this is dry now. Uh, Like I said, after you get over the initial shock of putting that wet pencil on the surface of your model and spreading it around, it actually, it doesn't look too bad. If you noticed, when it was wet, you could see little puddles or bubbles in there, plus maybe a few streaks here and there. But now that it's dry, it's actually looking pretty good. And remember, that was only two touches or two applications of the pencil on the surface, which I find it work better to wet the tip. And once the pigment softened, put it to the surface and then use a brush to smooth it around. Now, if you notice, I'm wearing a glove now versus the last frame shot. I'm going to show you another technique that I kind of picked up on, which was kind of cool. If you're looking for gentle, subtle changes, wet the tip of the pencil. I'm going to put this on the back of my glove here. Oh my God, look at that. Holy bleep. Jesus. Okay, so I put it on the back. Now I'm going to take my my wet brush and I'm just going to dip it around in there. Let me turn this around and use the other clean side here. Now that that's on the back of my glove there, ooh, it kind of goes on a little bit smoother there. Actually, like I say, depending on the effect and the technique that you're looking for, kind of goes on a little bit smoother there. So I'm going to put this on. I'm going to leave this open area in between the two. And then, like I say, I'm going to let this dry, and then you guys can take a look at it. And while it's wet, on the AK Interactive video, they actually took different colors and combined them while it was wet. As a matter of fact, let me get a darker color here. Oh, this is ivory black. Let me wet this here. Let's see what happens here. I'm going to put this on the back of my glove. Oh my God. Like I say, once you get over the initial shock, that's some pretty ivory black there. So, let's let this dry and we'll see what these two colors coming together here look like. Okay, so that is dried, and you can see how that actually blended together pretty good. So like I say, when it goes on wet, after the initial ghastly look and letting it dry, it actually looks and works out pretty good. Plus you can see with the combining the two different colors here, I think turned out pretty good. And remember, there were some bubbles and streaks in there. Doesn't look too bad. So that application was by putting the wet pencil on the back of my hand and taking a brush and then applying it to the surface. Notice it came out a little bit darker there than this one, but they actually look pretty good. Now, depending on darkness, you may want to put more pigment on there and smooth it around, but I actually found it's easier when you get to this point. If I wanted it darker, kind of like that car there, go ahead and seal it. Either with dull coat or whatever you prefer to seal it, go ahead and seal it, and then come back and put on another coat of it. It seems to work out a little bit better. If it's too dark and you want it more subtle or lighter, the thing to do here is go ahead and wet your tip, or clear your tip of the brush. Now notice how easily that watercolor loosen back up. So what you can do is, if you think that's too dark, go ahead and wet the tip of your brush and start taking some of it off. We'll go ahead and let that dry, and I guarantee you'll see a little bit slighter difference in the color. That will actually dry lighter. So let's give it a few minutes for that to dry. Okay, that's pretty much dry, and you can actually see a little bit lighter than the previous footage because, like I say, I'm using a wet brush and trying to remove it. You know, once again, let's see. I'm thinking, you know what? That's still a little too dark. Let's go ahead and lighten that up a little bit more here, and you can just see my wet brush. And just go ahead and start to remove that to your liking, you know. So let's give this a couple of minutes to dry, and then I'm pretty sure you're already starting to see the color variations here. Now, if you get to this point, you think, "Oh, now that's too light. Now we need to get dark again." Just go back and start over a little bit. Okay, so let's leave this dry. We'll check back in a few minutes. Okay, that's dry, and I'm pretty sure that you can actually see it's darker than it was before by just reapplying a little bit more there. Now, check this out. See the stuff on the back of my hand? That's dry. So I'm just going to flip around this piece of styrene. You can actually reactivate that. Yeah, I'm reactivating that dry watercolor pencil. I'm just going to do in the middle here. Like I say, you can. So I really like the way these watercolor pencils turn out. So we're going to leave that dry, and then we're going to come back and show you that one. Okay, that's pretty much dry, and I'm pretty sure you can see the subtle changes in the shades of brown that we're putting on here. Now, if you notice, got some hard lines here where I put on that last area. If you don't like that, I'm going to use a different brush here. This is a shorter, a smaller tip brush. I'm going to get it wet, and you could actually work this and dab it. Get rid of some of these hard lines. Go back to this blending again. I think the whole thing with these watercolor pencils is blending and shading. So you can see I got rid of that hard line there. So let's let this dry. And that way you can see that. Well, that's pretty much dry, and you can see where we had those hard lines before. I've kind of removed them. I think the whole trick with these watercolor pencils is technique and patience. For most people, especially me, patience is hard to come by. But as you can see, just a few short applications here, and patience, and it does not look too bad at all. You know, I think it's pretty good. And like I say, you can see from the hopper here, it's just a matter of technique, patience, and shading and blending. So, watercolor pencils, give them a try. I actually pretty pleased with the results that I was getting, and pretty impressed with a watercolor pencil. As you can see from the previous segments, they're pretty easy to work with. Is everybody going to like watercolor pencils? Probably not. Am I going to use watercolor pencils for every weathering application? Probably not, but there's definitely some uses for watercolor pencils. So give them a try. One last thing. Here's our test piece of plastic or test piece of styrene. If you don't like it, you want to start over, I'm just going to take this old broken toothbrush, wet it, A little bit of every bathroom's got a hand soap. Okay. Wet this. If you didn't like it, comes right off. So if for some reason you're not pleased with it and it's not working out, you think you need to start over and do it again, wash that bad boy off. We're right back to plain Jane styrene. Well, that pretty much does it for this edition. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. And as always, thanks for watching.